Okay, thank you. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, let me first and foremost express my sincere thanks to all participants for joining online at the FACTI Panel's second consultations with the United Nations member states. Let me mention the fact that for reasons of transparency, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted online. I hope you and your families are all staying safe, healthy, and doing as well as you possibly can in the face of this ongoing pandemic. It has been almost 3 months since our first virtual consultation. As I highlighted in that consultation, mobilizing sufficient resources and particularly domestic resources for implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is, as we all know, a major challenge. And there is no doubt that this challenge will be exacerbated by the current economic downturns and financial turmoil due to the pandemic. But at the same time, this unprecedented and global challenge reinforces the importance of our work. Indeed, it emphasizes the great urgency the international community must place on promoting financial integrity in order to mobilize greater financing for sustainable development. We need to ramp up our collective efforts to enhance accountability, transparency, and integrity, which is key to advance our shared goals. As committed at the launch of a panel in early March, we have been keeping an open and transparent approach in our functioning. Thanks to the hard work done by panel members and the Secretariat, despite the challenging conditions, during the 3-month time, we held a string of open virtual consultations with experts and civil society, which we have made available publicly. And through these virtual means, we have been able to speak with those in far-flung places. It has significantly enriched the work of a panel. So let me update you on the process we have undertaken so far. My co-chair will then brief you on the substantive discussions and moderate the deliberation today. Excellencies, I already mentioned the high level of engagement the panel has seen with its work, with hundreds of representatives of civil society and experts attending each of its open meetings. We have also issued a call for written inputs and received over 30 written inputs from around the world. We also engaged directly with various international institutions that play a role in financial integrity matters. This has included extremely useful discussions with standard-setting bodies like the OECD and FATF, as well as with UN agencies, especially the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Last week, we met with the African Union High-Level Panel on Illicit Financial Flows from Africa. We also participated in a high-level event on the margins of the HLPF, which allowed us to share our progress with a broader international community and to hear further inputs in our work. I want to thank all those who provided us with their inputs, thoughts, and considerations. Their open and constructive approach to the challenges facing countries and our investigation of possible solutions has reinforced our belief that by working as a community, we can create transparent, accountable, and equitable systems and legal frameworks. With these inputs and discussions, the panel moved forward to deepen its analysis with evidence and data. The panel members agreed to a preparation of 7 in-depth papers to inform the work within each cluster and the panel's interim report. Experts consultants have prepared these in-depth background papers, and the panel members discussed drafts of the papers at a meeting at the end of June. In keeping with our commitment to full transparency, the panel has published these papers on its website. Though the papers contain the opinions of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of a panel. So we would like to hear your ideas today for how the panel can advance the next step of its work. And as we move forward, we urge member states to come to us with their ideas and their willingness to work on new or creative solutions. These new or creative solutions will be a fundamental part of our report. At this time, I would like now to pass the floor to my co-chair, Dr. Dalia Grybauskaitė, who will brief you on the substantive work of the panel and manage the conduct of the meeting with the help of the Secretariat. Thank you for your attention. Dr. Dalia, over to you. Thank you.
And hello, everybody, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're meeting second time, and we expect a lot from our meeting. I want to address some important discussions we have had before I give the floor to the cluster chairs and coordinators. So overall number of topics emerged in our discussions. First, it was clear that member states have been trying to address tax avoidance, tax evasion, corruption, and money laundering. We learned about many new instruments and initiatives that have been developed over the last 20 years. At the same time, we saw that implementation of these instruments and initiatives has fallen short. In some cases, implementation has become a box-ticking exercise. But in other cases, countries are not even managing to tick the boxes. There is much room for improvement. Second, just as important, we learned about loopholes in our systems. Even if the implementation of existing instruments and initiatives was perfect, we would still not have fully transparent and accountable systems. Those who abuse the tax and financial systems and avoid rules and regulations could still do it with impunity and make lots of money in the process. Here also is much room for improvement, and it concerns all of us. Third, we have also heard about the global governance challenges. These are difficult because solutions rely on the political will of member states. Agreeing solutions will be up to the leadership of each member states. Fourth, addressing the constraints to stronger action may require a clearer analysis on who can influence the political environment in favor of change and who is resisting change because they benefit from the current system. And finally, we must look to the future to understand how to build back better from COVID-19, but also to anticipate the new technologies and the impact of digitalization. Excellencies, today we look forward to hearing further expectations and any specific proposal from you based on the progress of the panel so far and in advance of the publication of September's interim report. Before they proceed, I would like to set some suggestions or for the smooth operation of our virtual consultations. First, To keep dialogue clear, I hope you mute yourself to ensure background noise is not overwhelming the other participants. Of course, please don't forget to unmute yourself when you would like to speak. Second, if you would like to take the floor, please indicate so in the chat room or the meeting, and Secretariat will look after this information. If you lose sound or video, try refreshing the browser window or try to log out and reconnect to the meeting via link sent by the Secretariat. Finally, the panel will most benefit from short interventions and interactive discussion. We will, of course, welcome fuller statements to be sent in writing. However, we are mindful of the limited time and would both encourage short interventions and reactions to other delegations. Now I would like to invite our cluster leads, who will give you a briefing on the early findings from the analytical work of the panel. The first coordinator of cluster on improving cooperation in tax matters, Mr. José Antonio Ocampo. Mr. Ocampo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Let me do a very short presentation of the major issues that we have been discussing. In three of them, we have had background papers that were already mentioned that we discussed in our last meeting of the panel. The first major issue is how to limit tax avoidance and evasion, which has to do with the discussions going on that took place in OECD, the base erosion and profit shifting project, and are going on today around the issue of the digital economy and how to manage taxation in the age of digital transactions. So this has to do basically with the norms, the international norms that will apply to and we improve tax cooperation, and basically how taxation rights are allocated in order to be able to tax profits where economic activity really takes place. This, of course, is also related to an issue that the Group of 24 has been very strong on, which is the simplicity of the system, so that it can be managed effectively by the developing country tax administrations. The second issue of which I must say we so far don't have much background work, but which has been emphasized in all our meetings, are the gender, social, and environmental issues associated to taxation, and therefore how tax rules will contribute to the SDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. The third major issue, which actually came out very strongly in our meeting with the Africans, the last meeting we had, is the issue of participation of developing countries in the governance of the system, of the international tax cooperation system. And basically the point is that there should be effectively a universal participation in the design of norms and international instruments to improve the international tax system. And of course, one of the major issues in that regard is how to what extent the OECD inclusive framework is the appropriate context for that participation. I must say there were many African ministers and representatives that were complaining about how their voice is very weak in that forum, and therefore if we can, if this is going to be the major forum, how to strengthen that voice, and the UN Tax Committee, which according to some proposals in the past, particularly the G77 proposal in Addis Ababa, should become an intergovernmental body of a universal character, let's say. Anyway, so this is a third group of issues which really have to do with the governance of the system. And finally, the fourth issue is the issue of data or information. So it has to do with having reliable global data and a good system of exchange of information among tax authorities. Again, the process that is being managed today by the OECD. This, of course, this issue links with the topic that we'll see in the other clusters, and so it's an inter-cluster issue, let's say, which is the need for an adequate global asset registry with information about beneficial ownership as an essential instrument, actually in all of the areas that are being studied by the panel. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. This is my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, second cluster on accountability, public reporting, and anti-corruption measures, which is led by Ms. Susan Rose Ackerman. So, Susan, please, your floor.
Amir, yes. Hello, thank you. So this is to follow up on some things Jose was speaking about. Some of our background work particularly focuses on the beneficial ownership issue. So we're being very sort of well briefed on this topic, and on the way in which that process can be improved. I think there are issues having to do with how transparent that data should be to anybody who wants to see it, because some of the proposals would only make it available to law enforcement, would see it very much as part of being able to bring cases in the area either of corruption or, as Jose was speaking about, tax evasion. But much of the debate has also to do with that data being available to civil society, other groups who might be interested in helping to understand what's going on and in publicizing problems. This is, of course, overlaps and relates to the Financial Action Task Force activity. However, it has to be remembered, as these people are pointing out in the papers, that this is just data. Some of the reforms are ways to make that data more consistent, more able to be compared across countries. Are there ways the UN should be able to help with both with the consistency question, as well as with setting standards, and with helping countries that don't have a lot of capacity to be able to actually do this in a constructive way. Some of the discussion here has to do with the relationship between places where illicit funds have been generated through corruption, say, and the whole range of countries that are called havens, and the importance of noticing that although there are some havens which are relatively small countries for which this is an important part of their economies, but therefore they're imposing big costs on all the rest of the world, and that some of the havens are also very wealthy countries or parts of very wealthy countries, and that it's important to recognize recognize that, because after all, most of the money that's going through these havens is trying to get to the world financial markets, and that's an important piece of it. Several people have raised the issue of what are called corporate service providers. These are, of course, specialized professions, lawyers, accountants, other kinds of planners, who are extremely important in facilitating some of this activity that would apply in the tax area, of course, as well, and that this is a sector needs to be looked at. We're, of course, interested in the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and how that's working. It has a peer review process, and we've heard, I think, a variety of views about that, whether it's a useful thing to do, but there are some weaknesses in that process from the point of view of oversight of corruption, in the sense that countries have a good deal of control over what gets published, and how effective or how comprehensive that correct rather that those reports are. Finally, this one thing that came very importantly out of the meeting with a group of people who had been associated with the African Union FACTI panel, extremely useful discussion we had, was the problem or the issue of helping countries build capacity and helping countries learn from each other how to build capacity in a way that I think the UN could be very helpful. So where countries which themselves are in the middle or low level of development are able to share with other countries in the same or rich countries as well, how they're dealing with some of these difficulties related to corruption and other things, but corruption particularly. Is this something that the UN could be helpful in facilitating that kind of communication? Because I think we shouldn't forget about the need for structural reform in countries that are producing a lot of corruption, and we shouldn't forget about that at the same time as we worry, of course, about how the money crosses borders. It's crossing the border. It occurred because of some things that are going on inside one or another country. So I think that's enough, and we can go on to the third. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. Now the third cluster on cooperation and settling disputes, co-chaired by two people, Mr. Thomas Stelzer and Ms. Irene Odida. And I would invite first to speak Mr. Stelzer and followed by Ms. Odida.
Good morning, greetings to New York from Vienna, from the International Anti-Corruption Academy. I'm co-coordinating Cluster 3, which has been considering priority actions for improving cooperation and standardization of private investigation and prosecution. We have been examining options to strengthen peer review processes, explored gaps and developed options to improve capacity and improving international cooperation on asset recovery and return, and on ways and means to tackle the challenges the world is facing in relation to cooperation and settling disputes. At our recent taking stocks where we are standing, the panel members recognized the complexity of the issues and the systemic nature of the challenges given to multiple jurisdictions, legal systems, and national authorities involved in cases. Concern was expressed about the non-trial resolutions in foreign bribery cases becoming a type of protection for corrupt officials, but it was also recognized that the main concern on this issue is minimizing economic damage in affected developing economies. We also considered the asymmetries of information, power and capacity, developed countries and developing countries involved in these issues, both between companies and governments and in between developed countries and developing countries. Bribery can be a part of the business model of multinational companies. Panel members also recognize that non-trial resolutions can be a useful tool to promote ethics in business. We consider the important roles of education and training in ethics, compliance, and anti-corruption in fighting foreign bribery in general. We discussed with the experts who provided very useful background papers, and we asked them to further consider whether vested interests or other factors were behind the lack of implementation of the many relevant intergovernmental agreements made under the auspices of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. On peer reviews, it was stressed, the panel members stressed the importance of considering how to make peer review more related to the impact of policies and less box-ticking exercises. It was also stressed that the funding source for conducting peer reviews was an important aspect to consider. Going forward in cluster 3, we will be discussing the recommendations in the finalized background papers and how to reflect them in our interim report after having listened to the considerations brought forward today in these consultations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Irene, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Co-Chair. Good morning and good afternoon. Mr. Seltzer has summarized most of the issues. I'll just add very little to that. Just to recall that the third cluster of the work of the FACTI panel is looking at dispute settlement. And so those papers that were commissioned were in relation to that, so framed within the context of dispute settlement and international cooperation. What I would just add to this from the papers that we received, as well as the discussions that we had with the other stakeholders, including the FACTI panel, was that what has emerged beyond the specifics that Mr. Seltzer has talked about is the importance of ensuring that any of these mechanisms respond to the different situations that countries are in, developing countries, developed countries, and so on, and a whole range of contexts. So whether peer review or any other, the importance of these mechanisms and these rules responding to various diverse contexts. The other broad issue that cuts across here, just reflecting that the commonality of interest and complementarity of interests across countries, different parts of the world, and hence the need to strengthen international cooperation, but to ensure that there is political support, political will to achieve the solutions. What is clear, and that cuts across all of these issues, is that while they are highly technical, they're also highly political and are very much tied up. Getting consensus and international cooperation is very much tied up with the countries, with states being able to see the commonality of the issues and how the lack of effective solutions impacts on all of them, although to varying degrees. And finally, in relation to that, the importance, therefore, of strengthening the role of the UN in achieving solutions as a forum that can bring together countries that represent the various interests across the globe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much both. And now I would like to turn to Peter Schola from FACTI Secretariat to help us to call the delegations expressed willingness to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. I hope everybody can hear me well. In case you came in late, please indicate your desire to take the floor in the chat box or with the raise hand, and I will try to find you. I had a number of delegations who already indicated in advance that they would wish to take the floor, so I will take them in the order that we have them down. So, and just to give a little bit of warning, the first three I have are Morocco, Algeria, and Brazil. So first, that would be Ambassador Hilale from Morocco.
Thank you very much, dear Peter. At the outset, I would like to thank the co-chairs of the high-level panel on international financial accountability, transparency, and integrity, FACTI panel, His Excellency Dr. Ibrahim Ayaki and His Excellency Dr. Dalia Griboskaite, for convening these virtual consultations. We appreciate your approach that put regular communication and consultations with member states at its heart. Appreciations also to all the panel members and their efforts in presenting the early findings of the analytical work they had conducted in preparation of the panel's interim report. In this regard, in this unprecedented current conjuncture, we support the strong scope of the report on the financing of the 2030 agenda and mobilization of financial resources, especially in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. It goes without saying that the post-COVID era is indeed characterized by the exacerbation of the existing challenges for achieving sustainable development and sufficient financial resources for development, deterioration of the economic conditions, deepening of poverty rates and hunger, coupled by climate change impact, are all factors that are likely undo all gains of development. The panel has a critical role in this context in developing timely and concrete recommendations in terms of financial integrity related topics, especially in era of combating illicit financial flows. We welcome the characterization agreed by the panel with regard to the implementation of these recommendations according to whether they could be implemented in the short term, medium term, or the long term. Dear co-chairs, allow me to make specific brief comments in contribution to this discussion. First, regarding improving cooperation in tax matters, I would like to reiterate the call made by the African Group in its statement delivered in the recent event on the margin of HLPF on the need to encourage countries and relevant multilateral organizations to strengthen their effort to provide technical and capacity building assistance for developing countries, especially in Africa, in order to improve their capacity to prevent, detect, and combat illicit financial flows and strengthen good practices on assets return to foster sustainable development. I would like also to ask the panel on their perspectives for the COVID-19 era. How will the repercussions of pandemic affect the international effort for combating corruption? And what role of education and cultural shifts in this context? 3, we would like to stress the need on giving a large space for concrete and feasible recommendation on combating illicit financial flows. We believe it is a central problematic on which we expect the panel to advance discussions and solutions recommendations. Finally, we encourage the panel to continue its regular consultations with member states. We also encourage that the work of the panel and its recommendation needs to follow a priority logic, meaning addressing and generating ideas in collective manner, the most pressing issues related to resources mobilization and financial integrity, especially in situations where lockdowns and recessions have shrunk tax revenues and more financial flows are needed for health and social protection response. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I next have from Algeria, Ambassador Mimouni. I didn't see him yet, so I'm not sure if he managed to join. Is Algeria there online? Okay, perhaps I will come back and he will join later. I now have Ambassador Costa of Brazil.
Thank you very much, and let me start by thanking all the members of the panel for convening this meeting, and to thank FACTI for all the work put in these extraordinarily challenging times. As you know, Brazil has put the fight against corruption and the promotion of financial integrity, transparency, and accountability as a top national priority. However, and as the panel itself has concluded in its last meeting, financial integrity is a global problem, since national policies in this area have global spillovers. Therefore, international cooperation is of the utmost importance. We appreciate this process of frequent consultation with member states, since the panel emerged from a resolution of the General Assembly, and its policy proposals will require country ownership. We have examined documents issued prior to this round of consultations and are further interested in some thematic areas and on how the panel has advanced in its different clusters. Firstly, we are interested to see how the research in the area of asset recovery has progressed. We know that this topic is the object of increased politicization, which not necessarily leads to the best results. Asset recovery needs to follow clear rules in order for it to be as swift as possible without the imposition of any conditionalities. At the same time, the panel has pointed out in the summary of its last meeting that, and I quote, vested interests may be benefiting from existing systems and thus resisting reforms or changes, end of quote. And the question I have is if you could please elaborate more on this and share the progress the research has uncovered on the adequacy of international norms and regulations in this area. I would also like to touch back on two issues I raised in the previous consultation. There were ideas set forth on the possibilities of a cession of sovereignty in the context of multilateral enforcement and of management of repatriated stolen assets assigned to NGOs. How have the discussions on these topics evolved since? And in the area of cooperation in tax matters, we understand the more nuanced approach put forth by the panel, which makes some sense for discussions like the one on the taxation of the digital economy. But we also recall that many of the contemporary issues in international taxation still reflect differences in interests between developed and developing countries, in part as a result of the limited participation of developing countries in the negotiations. In its last meeting, the panel mentioned a proposal for a UN convention in tax matters, whose significance is not fully clear to us. We would thus appreciate to have more information in that regard. Let me just say that we continue to be engaged and look forward to the conclusions of the panel, as well as to the interim report next September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I have, I'll read out the next three I have on my list. I have Nigeria and then Fiji and then Pakistan. So going to Nigeria first, Ambassador Itegboje. I saw you come online. Yes, there you are, Ambassador. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. We want to begin by appreciating the co-chairs and other members of the panel for their continuing transparent engagement with member states in the course of their assignment. We welcome the panel's forward-looking interim analysis of the gaps, as well as its reference to existing initiatives and instruments in discussing vulnerabilities and impediments in the current system as it relates to issues of financial accountability, transparency, and integrity. We agree with the panel on the importance of having a balanced approach that reflects the situation in different regions and the priorities of different stakeholders. My delegation wishes to stress that the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have disproportionately affected the resource base of most developing countries. If the global aspiration to recover better from the impacts of the pandemic will yield any inclusive result, it is important that we comprehensively address existing structures that make it impossible for countries to generate and retain a sizable chunk of their resources. Co-chairs, it is the view of my delegation that addressing tax reforms and supporting domestic resource mobilization and retention would promote equity, help in achieving economic growth, and accelerate the implementation of the SDGs in this decade of action. Evidences suggest that the contemporary international tax system uses a taxing rights regime that is not suitable for the current era, as it makes combating tax abuses, especially by multinational corporations, a genuine dilemma for most developing countries. We will therefore appreciate if the report of the FACTI panel could introduce elements that will lead us towards a fairer international tax regime. We also hope that the report would contain elements that would address the continuing advocacy for country-by-country reporting, open disclosure, and automatic exchange of information on beneficial ownership, as well as eliminate financial secrecy jurisdictions and tax havens that facilitate base erosion and profit shifting. It is important also that profit shifting, tax competition, also called the race to the bottom, taxation of the digital economy, among other important issues, receive adequate attention and focus in the report of the panel. Furthermore, evidences indicate that the current international mechanisms for asset recovery are not good enough, as can be seen in the amounts lost to illicit financial flows and the length of time taken before the repatriation of just a small fraction. The FACTI panel report can play an important role in bridging the expectations of resource and destination countries, as well as in harmonizing the process of assets recovery and return. It is in this connection that we suggest that the emphasis of the common African position on asset recovery, on mechanisms for the one, detection and identification of assets of illicit origin; 2, recovery and return of such assets; 3, management of such assets; 4, cooperation and partnership; and 5, cross-cutting issues, could serve as good model to explore in seeking best practices that could address the end-to-end process in a pointed fashion. Another issue that my delegation would like to raise is the need for capacity building in developing countries, given the technicalities associated with issues of accountability, transparency, and financial integrity. We will also appreciate if the FACTI panel could consider the best ways to mobilize all relevant stakeholders and strengthen international cooperation in the global efforts to curtail the menace of IFF. But co-chairs, given that illicit financial flow is a problem that must be addressed internationally, the FACTI panel report should analyze the extent to which we are on the right path in our commitments to combat the scourge and strengthen the cooperation in dispute settlement and peer lending, particularly in asset recovery and return. We are aware that some vested interests could be benefiting from the existing system and therefore resisting reform. However, in the face of the current financial difficulties occasioned by the rapid impact of COVID-19 and glaring possibilities of economic hardship and recession, we encourage all delegations to support the FACTI panel to realize its mandates. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I next had on my list, as I said, Fiji, but I'm not sure if Ambassador Prasad is here. Is Fiji online? Okay, as with Algeria, we'll come back after I've finished the current list and we'll see if they've been able to join. I next have Ambassador Amir Khan of Pakistan. Ambassador Khan.
Thank you very much. Just mind a correction. This is Jahangir Khan from the meeting. The ambassador had to leave for another meeting, so I'm delivering the statement on his behalf. Okay, so let me begin. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank both the co-chair and members of the FACTI panel for the presentation. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, the world's richest 1% own 44% of the world's wealth. The data also shows 56.6% of the world's population holds less than 2% of the global wealth. Among other factors, illicit financial flows are one of the key contributory factors that has contributed in broadening these inequalities within and among countries. These are a fundamental contributory factor for the economic underperformance of the developing countries. These flows further reduce the already limited fiscal space available for the developing countries to invest in their own growth and welfare. IFFs are also a major hurdle in mobilizing domestic public finance for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. The $2.1 trillion, which the UN Office for Drugs and Crime estimates flows out from criminal proceeds, is almost equivalent to the annual investment gap of developing countries of $2.5 trillion to achieve the SDGs. With the COVID-19 pandemic, existing inequalities have further exacerbated by limiting the developing countries' ability and resources to achieve sustainable development. Therefore, more than ever, there is a need to address structural deficiencies in our financial system, including ways and measures to combat illicit financial flows. Dear co-chairs, the amount of Pakistan's stolen assets illegally transferred and held abroad runs into billions. The current government in Pakistan is committed to fight against all forms of illicit financial flows, particularly corruption. We have taken several steps to strengthen our financial regulations in order to plug the loopholes that could be exploited to facilitate IFFs. However, our national efforts must be complemented by international cooperation. Pakistan supported and joined the Panel on International Financial Accountability, Transparency and Integrity, that is FACTI, to this end. It is our hope that the panel will be able to provide actionable proposals to address deficiencies in international financial system, which make illicit financial flows possible. This would be a major contribution to achieving the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. Dear Presidents, while Pakistan appreciates the work of the panel, we have following recommendations for the panel's consideration. First, its major focus should be on tax avoidance, tax evasion, and profit shifting practices. These are major areas of revenue erosion. We hope that the panel will propose important recommendations for action. The panel could also help to devise equitable rules for taxation, particularly for the digital economy. Second, corruption should be looked from both sides, those who offer and those who receive illegal gratification. Similarly, asset recovery should also be analyzed from both ends, from where it flows out and where it is going to. Pakistan has already raised particular concerns with regards to the fact that there are no effective mechanisms for assets returning to developing countries. To this end, we believe the adoption of an additional protocol on assets return under the UN Convention Against Corruption may be an effective instrument to ensure early and fair return of illegally transferred assets. Third, we are of the view that the panel should review the role of investment treaties, which are manifestly unfair to developing countries. The financial awards against a number of developing countries recently indicated the need for more equitable structure of international financial adjudication. And finally, the panel should suggest ways to address the fragmentation in current regime to combat illicit financial flows. The respective mandates of many intergovernmental, non-governmental, and private entities are widely dispersed. It would be vital to bring coherence in the system in order to enhance its effectiveness and credibility. To this end, we recommend the creation of a UN body to oversee or coordinate various bodies involved in dealing with illicit financial flows. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for delivering that statement on behalf of your ambassador. I next have Uganda, Ambassador Odida, Philip Odida.
Yes. Distinguished co-chairs, I take this opportunity, first of all, to thank you for organizing this important second virtual consultation of the panel with the UN member states and commend the panel for the work it has done so far. My delegation firmly believes in the importance of the work of the panel, which will help to bring a much better understanding of the critical role of financial accountability, integrity, and transparency in mitigating the challenges and resource gaps that limit the successful achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The success of the SDGs is contingent upon sound, adequate, and meaningful financing, whose efficacy stands at the risk of being undermined by the prevalence of illicit financial flows. Therefore, achieving the FACTI mandate is important if the United Nations and its members are serious about achieving the 2030 Agenda for Development. My delegation welcomes the view of the panel that its interim report should be forward-looking, should provide analysis of the gaps in existing global architecture to achieve financial integrity and transparency, and take a balanced approach while respecting the diversity of different regional contexts. In this regard, I refer to the findings of the Mbeki report on illicit financial flows, which form the basis of the Special Declaration of the African Union on illicit financial flows in 2015. The report revealed that Africa has lost an estimated $1.8 trillion between 1970 and 2008, and continues to lose extensive finances estimated up to $150 billion annually through illicit financial flows. These losses are mainly as a result of tax evasion, mispricing of trade and services by multinational companies. African heads of state realized the need for domestic resource mobilization for the attainment of its continental development visions and goals, particularly Africa's Agenda 2063. This realization formed the basis of the African Common Position on the post-2015 development agenda. We therefore urge the panel to draw lessons from the approach of the Mbeki high-level panel and build on its recommendations as a way forward. Co-chairs, today, all attempts at meeting the common aspirations for development at all levels, be they regional, continental, or even global, have been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, whose impact is yet to be fully realized. The ability of majority of countries, including in Africa, to respond effectively to the pandemic are severely constrained by the huge public finances required to address both the health and economic costs. As part of the agenda for building back better in the post-COVID-20 era, it is important that the question of financial transparency and integrity be dealt with as a matter of urgency. In this regard, my delegation is concerned with the following specific issues. First, at the global level, criminal activities like money laundering, bribery, and corruption remain a growth industry due to weak national laws or poor enforcement and gaps in international cooperation on issues such as asset recovery. The past experience has shown that assets from Africa and other developing countries have ended up in hidden accounts and assets offshore. Clearly, the current international mechanisms for asset recovery are insufficient, as reflected in the amount lost and time taken before repatriation of small fractions to countries concerned. Secondly, it's clear that the current lack of financial transparency, accountability, and integrity is a global issue related to ineffective and inadequate global financial architecture and rules resulting in the financial flows. A major gap remains international rules on corporate taxation and current rules on dispute settlement that seem to privilege multinational enterprises over the rights of states or governments to regulate and fairly tax their activities. My delegation therefore reiterates the imperative that all international tax cooperation efforts should be approached in an open, transparent, and inclusive manner, with a view to building a fairer and equitable system that ensures that no region is left behind. It's only in this manner that desired financial accountability, transparency, and integrity goals can be achieved at a global level. In this regard, we therefore continue to support the long-standing proposals to upgrade the current UN Committee of Experts on International Cooperation in Tax Matters to an intergovernmental body with experts representing their respective governments. We therefore urge the panel, and indeed all UN members, to take seriously the proposals regarding giving priority to enhancing the role of the UN as the forum for seeking of norms on international taxation. I conclude my remarks, co-chairs, by indicating that my delegation therefore looks forward to the interim report. I thank you once again for organizing this meeting and giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I now have 4 more on my list. First, I have Ms. Miriam Hilali, who I think is perhaps speaking on behalf of a group or at least some colleagues. And then I will have the US, Russia, and the UK. So Ms. Hilali, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, dear moderator, and let me thank you and welcome the panel for the work that has been done so far in the preparation of the interim report. I wish also to warmly thank FACTI for their continuous work on financial matters during these challenging and transformative times of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you rightly mentioned, Mr. Moderator, as the coordinator of the African Group of Experts in New York, I will not deliver a statement as many distinguished PRs from our group have done eloquently before me, but I will rather ask a set of interactive questions based on some elements that has been put forward by our group in previous occasions. So let me maybe outline those questions, and there'll be 5. I'll be very brief and concise. First question, the African group would like to further request that the FACTI panel clarifies how we make concrete recommendations that would adequately address the gap in regulating commercial illicit financial flows. Secondly, how is the panel concretely building on recommendations of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa? Thirdly, what is the panel doing to make use of the analysis and reform proposals in the field of digital economy in the context of developing countries and, of course, in the context of Africa? Recently, or namely by building on the recent UNCTAD study on the digital divide. And finally, I wish to ask, what are the main conclusions that emerged from the interaction of the panel, of the high-level panel, of course, on illicit financial flows with African member states, and in which manner you envisage dedicating a specific space of recommendation in your reports to combating illicit financial flows in Africa. Thank you once more for this opportunity, and appreciation to all the panel members. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Hilali. Now I have Mr. Walters of the United States of America delegation.
Good morning, colleagues, excellencies. Thank you very much for your time today. Again, thank you to the panel for its ongoing work and willingness to engage with member states. It is very greatly appreciated. To start off today, I would just like to say that we very much support the panel's view that recommendations in all of the papers should be guided by the technical feasibility of proposed policies and the political viability of proposals to advance action on recommendations. We also welcome the panel's view that there is often a large disparity between legal frameworks and the actual practice of implementation. For the United States, this is a very important and essential issue for us as we work together. Given the papers were just published, we will need more time to kind of deliberate internally on both the background analysis and recommendations. We would, however, note that many of the recommendations, including in the briefing papers, correspond to many things that the United States has been long advocating. For example, we appreciate the analysis of the various peer review mechanisms. The United States has long held that peer review mechanisms are an important tool in encouraging countries to fulfill their international anti-corruption obligations and commitments. We are a member, active participant in, and or supporter of almost all of the review mechanisms listed in the briefing paper. We firmly believe that these mechanisms should be more than a checkbox exercise, as has been noted by some of the speakers today. Instead, members should utilize the reviews to determine where they are succeeding and where they are experiencing challenges in implementing anti-corruption measures. This can help determine where reform or increased technical capacity is needed. In this regard, including civil society and other non-government stakeholders in the review process can greatly increase the accuracy and thoroughness of the review. These stakeholders can bring valuable expertise and perspectives to the review process. As such, we appreciate the recommendation about including non-governmental stakeholders in the reviews, although we leave it up to member states of the review mechanisms to determine how this can best be done. Likewise, we agree that member states should increase the visibility of the reviews. This is why the United States has pledged to publish our reports, including our uncapped review report, and very much encourage other countries to do the same. These simple acts often require little or no time or resources, but can very much greatly increase the impact of the reviews. We also see merit in many of the recommendations made in the asset recovery briefing paper, particularly those recommendations that would strengthen the ability of asset recovery practitioners to successfully recover stolen assets. For example, we support the use of non-conviction-based confiscation laws and have encouraged countries to adopt similar laws, as they can be a useful tool in recovering proceeds of crime when criminal conviction is impossible. We also appreciate the recommendation for countries to establish dedicated asset recovery units, and we think that this is very important. The United States was one of the first countries to establish such a unit, which has allowed us to recover billions of dollars of these funds. On tax matters, we support a more nuanced approach to the challenges facing international cooperation beyond a focus on developing versus developed countries. We would also like to see the UN support the OECD's work on the impact of international tax rules on developing countries. As a general point, we are concerned that there was not more of a focus on the positive contributions of the Financial Action Task Force and the OECD. We think it is important to see more attention and credit given to their ongoing efforts. And today, the United States would be interested in hearing a bit more about the engagement with the with FATF and the OECD, how those consultations went, and what some of the panel members thought were key takeaways from that. The United States continues to find UN Convention on Tax Matters politically challenging, as other international commitments have not yet been fulfilled. This idea would be politically challenging to accomplish at this point. Again, thank you very much for your time. We look forward to reviewing the briefing papers in detail and looking forward to engaging in September on the midterm review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. So next I have Mr. Meschanov of the Russian delegation. Russia, you have...
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Thank you very much. So distinguished co-chairs, moderator, and colleagues and friends, we appreciate the invitation of the meeting and would like to share our views and comments on the past work and the ongoing and future work of the panel. We still study recently issued background papers and would appreciate if you could provide information on the process and procedure preparation of these papers, because we see, for example, the editors and authors are not only the panelists. Also, we would appreciate elaborating of methods of coordination of the panel with the work of the discussion group 6 on illicit financial flows of the newly established FFD process of COVID-19 and beyond. At this stage, we first just reaffirm our comments submitted during the previous meeting. Possible reaction from the panel, the Secretariat would be welcome. In particular, we propose to the panelists acting in close cooperation with the Conference of the State Parties to the UNCAC and its working bodies to explore ways to fill in the existing legal gaps and prepare concrete proposals for improving existing legal mechanisms and frameworks on the return of criminal assets. Secondly, remains unexplored the possibility of applying the provisions of the UNCAC to returning assets resulting from civil and administrative offenses rather than pure criminal corruption cases. Further, would appreciate your vision towards developing an integrated approach to the use of modern information technologies in the prevention of corruption, as well as combating corruption-related crimes committed using these technologies, including tackling conflict of interests. We reemphasize the importance of interaction of the panel with existing specialized international formats, in particular the CAC COSP, without duplicating or replacing them. This is especially important in view of the preparation of the special session of the UN General Assembly against corruption scheduled for April next year. In this regard, we support the focus of the panel on the transparency of beneficiary ownership and recall St. Petersburg statement on promoting public-private partnership in the prevention of and fight against corruption, initiated by our country and adopted by the resolution 6/5 of the Conference of the State Parties to the UNCAC. We would also appreciate clarifications on the proposals for collation and dissemination of data on pending mutual legal assistance requests, as well as the creation of standards for non-trial resolutions in foreign bribery cases to address the current fragmented landscape. On both issues initiated and proposed, as far as I understand, by the distinguished panelists, regular discussions are being held at meetings of working bodies of the CAC COSP and reflected in the resolutions of the conference. And the panel is kindly asked to clarify its further plans and intentions on both proposals and whether they are going to be included in the interim report. Same request on initiatives on empowering the victims of corruption, greater oversight of banks and facilitators of corruption-related money laundering, and enhancing the multilateral exchange of information among country authorities on grand corruption cases. Specifically, since these issues have been raised, and what aspects are of particular interest for the panel, and how the discussion is going to be aligned with the provisions of the UNCAC. Last but not least, based on the materials of the website of the panel, we got an impression that there is a proposal initiative on establishment of the International Anti-Corruption Court or recommendations in this regard, following the work of the panel. Based on the existing experience of cooperation with international criminal justice bodies, we treat with great cautiousness this idea, and we wouldn't be able to support its further development. Regrettably, international bodies of this kind very often demonstrate political bias, one-sidedness, and inefficiency, far from high standards of justice. This undermines the legitimacy and validity of their decisions. They also quite freely deal with such important legal categories as the immunity of high-ranking officials, the inadmissibility of interference in international affairs, and the observance of the rights of the accused. So we will also submit our views in writing. We'll thank you, wish success and courage in your work, and we confirm our willingness and readiness to engage in the work of the panel and preparation of its reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Meshchanov. I now have Mr. Spells from the United Kingdom.
Excellencies, thank you for the helpful update. The United Kingdom would like to make the following comments based on your briefing and the summary of your recent panel meeting, as the majority of papers were uploaded yesterday and we have not had the chance to review them yet. Some general comments to start with. We agree that your recommendations should be guided by technical feasibility and political viability to advance action. We also agree that there is often a large disparity between legal frameworks and the actual practice of implementation. We welcome the focus on transparency, including in the field of public procurement and issues of tax transparency. However, we note with concern that the panel's approach to the private sector feels overly critical. Every part of the international system has a role to play in combating illicit financial flows, and so we hope the panel's recommendations will also set out suggestions for how the private sector can be properly harnessed. On tax matters, we recognise the need for a more nuanced approach to the challenges facing international cooperation beyond an oversimplified developed versus developing split. We encourage the UN to support the OECD's work to take stock of the impact of international tax rules on developing countries. The UK is the largest funder of the mainstreaming development programme at the OECD. On the proposal of a UN convention, the UK would like to reiterate that many other conventions are still not yet being fully implemented. Furthermore, new conventions incur significant costs and challenges which risk diverting our focus and slowing progress on combating IFFs. On accountability, public reporting and anti-corruption, we welcome the recognition that levels of corruption are driven by wider incentives and political economy issues. On beneficial ownership transparency, we encourage the panel to consider the work of the International Leadership Group on Beneficial Ownership, as well as consult Open Ownership as one of the leading technical experts in this field. We note the panel's discussions on potential loopholes in existing frameworks. No framework will ever be perfect, and the UK believes that a bigger problem is that a majority of countries either do not have or apply the relevant frameworks on transparency, including open contracting standards and budget transparency. As such, we look forward to the panel's recommendations addressing this issue. On cooperation and settling disputes, we agree with the panel that there is a gap in addressing the demand side of foreign bribery cases. The OECD Convention on Bribery of Foreign Officials is an important part of addressing the gap, which enjoys support both within and beyond OECD member countries, and so we encourage UN member states to sign up. We also look forward to recommendations on how to make peer reviews focused on the impact of policies rather than a tick box exercise, as the panel's summary suggests. Finally, some questions. We would be grateful for more information on the suggestion that there might be low-cost solutions better adapted to developing country contexts than implementing ownership registries. What were the trade-offs and other solutions considered? Open ownership, as mentioned before, have developed an effective and low-cost approach to enable developing countries, in particular, to combat illicit financial flows in this area. And indeed, based on the estimates by the Adam Smith Institute of how much these would cost, they seem to be a very, very small fraction of the illicit financial flows currently leaving developing countries. The second question is further elaboration from the panel on their consideration of the role of the Financial Action Task Force and the OECD, as only the former was mentioned and only in the context of beneficial ownership transparency in the summary on one occasion, and the OECD was not mentioned at all. What consideration of their work have you given at this point? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then the last one on my list currently, I have Ms. Rahel Pema from Switzerland.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Excellencies, distinguished members of the panel, colleagues. Thank you very much for convening the second consultation with member states and for sharing the status of work of the panel. We commend you for your continuous work on this topic of financial accountability, integrity and transparency, which Switzerland considers greatly relevant for the international community as a whole and for achieving the SDGs in particular. Switzerland takes note of the publication of several background papers on the FACTI Panel website. We regret the last-minute publication, which did not allow for a proper analysis of their rich content. Due to the complexity of the different matters treated by the FACTI Panel, and as previously expressed, Switzerland expects that the process milestones and essential contents are shared timely. In the event that findings pertaining to Switzerland and its legalizations are included in the interim report or any other report of the FACTI Panel, we appreciate to be formally consulted in order to comment on these aspects. For instance, in the background paper number 7, there are points regarding the Swiss Foreign Illicit Acts that need to be rectified, respectively clarified. However, we are overall glad to see that the approach Switzerland is taking with regard to asset recovery is mentioned as a model, and we are convinced that the good practices on asset return, as promoted through the initiative by Ethiopia and Switzerland, have the potential to impact positively the implementation of the Agenda 2030. We have expressed our general expectations towards the work of the panel on several occasions and through different channels and refrain from repeating them today. We look forward to continue the exchanges with the panel, and we look forward to timely consultation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pema. So that is the last co-chairs. That is the last person I have on my list of who wanted to take the floor, unless anybody else would like to indicate it this time. I will hand the floor back to the co-chairs.
Okay, if it is the last intervention, thank you very much for all. And I would like just to say that we are very happy about the engagement and involvement. And it is clear that we are promising to have regular consultations with member states. We are eager to be very much clear on our understanding how our work is going on. And I want only to mention that background papers published recently for your attention are not a property or ownership of the panel, and it is the expert's opinion, which we also studying and will decide what and how to include into our interim report. So we're very eager to answer. If you will write your questions and requests in writing, we will try to respond at this stage as much as we can, but our panel proposals will appear only in interim report, and we expect this to be done in September. So your engagement is absolutely valuable, and to hear your opinions on a lot of questions, especially what is visible, what is difficult politically to achieve, it is important, because we do have the goal for ourselves to make proposals short term, which are absolutely visible and necessary, the medium term, which may be more difficult to achieve, but also very much necessary, and long term, which necessary, but politically probably will take more time and will be difficult to achieve. So anyway, we are very thankful for your opinions and the valuable inputs which we had from you. And I would like to say that we will prepare the meeting summary and will share you in due time. And also we will publish the recorded materials publicly. So we are very thankful for your clear indications, your clear opinions, and your involvement. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And I wish you be healthy. Peter, if nobody is willing to add anything, we can finish our meeting.
Okay, I didn't know if Dr. Mayaki also wanted to say anything at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair. No, I'll be very brief, Excellencies. We aim to make our interim report available in September. As you know, at the time of a General Assembly gathering. It seems, however, that we will not be able to meet heads of states and governments in person in New York. So we'll convene whatever in-person meetings that we can manage while holding virtual meetings as necessary. And our panel members are ready to engage with member states and the financial integrity community in all parts of the world. So I welcome you all to continuously engage in the panel's future activities and regional consultations. We sincerely believe your active participation will help us drive actions towards enabling the global economic and financial systems to work better for everyone and everywhere. And as the co-chair was, my co-chair was mentioning, I wish you and your loved ones continued health and success to all efforts to control the spread of COVID-19 and address the consequences of the pandemic. Thank you very much.
So thank you all.